London's East End, a place where the line between legend and lawlessness has always been razor thin. And at the heart of it all stands a single pub, ordinary on the outside, infamous on the inside, the Blind Beggar. It's more than just bricks and beer. It's a stage where gangsters made their names, and where blood was spilled in broad daylight. Before we get to the night that sealed its place in criminal history, we need to go back to the roots of this East End landmark and see how an unassuming bar became a symbol of power, fear, and murder. Welcome to Crime Pulse. If you're new here, hit subscribe and join our growing community, digging into the UK's most dangerous criminal underworlds. Like, share, and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. The Blind Beggar's story begins in 1673, when a pub first opened its doors on this very spot in Whitechapel, a bustling working-class district known for its lively markets and rough edges. The pub's name harks back to a medieval legend about Henry de Montfort, the son of the Earl of Leicester. After the bloody Battle of Evesham in 1265, where his family's forces were defeated, Henry is said to have disguised himself as a blind beggar to evade capture, hiding in plain sight. Whether true or not, the tale gave the pub its name and a hint of mystery that would only grow over time. Fast forward to the 19th century, and the Blind Beggar became more than just a local watering hole. In 1865, a young preacher named William Booth stood outside its doors, delivering a fiery open-air sermon to passers-by. His words sparked a movement that would become the Salvation Army, a global organization dedicated to helping the poor and downtrodden. The pub, though rebuilt in 1894 by the Man, Crossman, and Paulin's Albion Brewery, remained a landmark, its walls steeped in stories of both hope and vice. By the early 20th century, the Blind Beggar had earned a darker reputation. Before the First World War, it was a haunt for pickpockets, thieves, and other shady characters who thrived in the East End's underworld. One such figure, a thug named Bulldog Wallace, cemented the pub's notoriety. During a heated altercation, Wallace fatally stabbed a man in the eye with the tip of his umbrella. True to the East End's unwritten code of silence, no one came forward to testify against him. No one saw nothing, they claimed, and Wallace walked free, returning to the Blind Beggar to cheers from his cronies, who hailed him as a hero. As the decades passed, the pub's legacy as a hub for both community and crime set the stage for one of its most infamous moments, when a new generation of East End villains would walk through its doors, ready to make history of their own. The Blind Beggar pub, a fixture on Whitechapel Road since 1673, had long been a gathering spot for East End locals, from preachers like William Booth to criminals like Bulldog Wallace. By the 1960s, it was a well-known haunt in London's rough-and-tumble underworld. On March 9, 1966, at 8:30 p.m., Ronnie Kray walked through its doors, accompanied by his associate Ian Barry. Their driver John Dixon waited outside in a Mark I Cortina. Ronnie Kray, one of the Kray Twins, was a key figure in the East End's criminal scene, running the firm with his brother Reggie. They were locked in a bitter rivalry with the Richardsons, a South London gang. Ronnie had a personal grudge against George Cornell, a Richardson's member who had once insulted him by calling him a fat poof in front of others. Ronnie later wrote that this insult marked Cornell for trouble. Inside the pub, it was a quiet night with only 5 people present. George Cornell was at one end of the bar with his friends Albie Woods and Johnny Dale. A 79-year-old man sat at the other end, reading a newspaper and glancing at the television. The barmaid was washing glasses, having just put on "The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore" by the Walker Brothers on the pub's record player, as there was no jukebox. Ronnie and Barry entered calmly, without drawing attention, but the mood shifted when Barry fired 2 shots into the ceiling, startling everyone in the room. George Cornell, hanging out at the bar with his buddies Albie Woods and Johnny Dale, spotted Ronnie Kray walking towards him. Knowing they didn't get along, Cornell said with a bit of a sneer, "Well, look who's here." Woods and Dale didn't stick around. They slipped off to the restroom, leaving Cornell by himself. Ronnie didn't waste time. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a 9mm Mauser pistol, and shot Cornell in the head from close range. In the Kray Twins book, Our Story, Ronnie kept it short. He fell forward onto the bar. There was some blood on the counter. That's all that happened, nothing more. The shot hushed the pub, leaving the barmaid and an old man reading a newspaper at the other end of the bar stunned. This wasn't just another night in the East End. It was a moment that would shake things up, leading to bigger consequences for Ronnie and his crew. The gunshot in the Blind Beggar pub left George Cornell slumped over the bar, and the handful of people inside were frozen in shock. Ronnie Kray and Ian Barry didn't stick around. They quickly left the pub and joined their driver, John Dixon, waiting outside in the Mark I Cortina. As they sped off, John Dixon later said Ronnie was buzzing, repeating, "I actually shot him. I actually shot him." They drove about half a mile to the Lion pub on Tapp Street, where Reggie Kray, Ronnie's twin and partner in their criminal outfit, the Firm, was having a drink with some of their crew. When Ronnie broke the news about Cornell, Reggie jumped up, barking, "Drive off the manor. Just drive off the manor." The Firm scattered, taking different cars and routes to avoid being followed, and ended up in the back room at the Checkers pub on Walthamstow's High Street. There, they moved fast to cover their tracks. Ronnie's clothes were burned, and the 9mm Mauser pistol used in the shooting was handed to a guy named Charlie Clark, a cat burglar, to get rid of. He didn't do a great job. Years later, the gun was found in the mud of the River Lee and now sits in Scotland Yard's Black Museum. Back at the Blind Beggar, the pub's manager, Patsy Quill, called for an ambulance. Medics rushed Cornell across the street to the London hospital, and soon after, he was moved to Maida Vale Hospital, which specialized in brain injuries. But it was too late. Around 10:29 p.m., about 2 hours after the shooting, Cornell died before doctors could operate. By midnight, the Firm had regrouped and was listening to the radio when news of Cornell's death came through. The room erupted in cheers. Ronnie, sounding relieved, said, "Always shoot to kill," adding, "Dead men can't speak." The night's violence had ended, but the consequences of that shot in the Blind Beggar were just beginning to unfold for the Krays and their world. In the aftermath of the brazen murder at the Blind Beggar pub, the police faced an unbreakable wall of silence. Led by the determined Detective Superintendent Leonard Nipper Red, investigators struggled to secure any witnesses willing to come forward. Everyone in the East End seemed to know the truth, that Ronnie Kray had pulled the trigger on George Cornell, but fear kept mouths shut tight. Cornell's two mates, Albie Woods and Johnny Dale, didn't stick around. They bolted out the back door of the pub, but not before slyly wiping down the glasses on the counter to erase any fingerprints. Smart move, maybe, but it screamed guilt and cover-up. The woman behind the bar, who had a front row seat to the chaos, claimed she hadn't seen a thing. In a packed pub like that, it was hard to believe, but that's the power of intimidation in the Kray Twins' territory. When pressed by the cops on why he wouldn't help nail Ronnie Kray, an elderly patron delivered a line straight out of a gangster flick. "I hate the sight of blood," he quipped, "particularly my own." It was a not-so-subtle reminder of the deadly consequences for snitches. Despite the stonewalling, the truth simmered just below the surface. The whole neighborhood whispered about the Krays' involvement, but no one dared speak up. Even George Cornell's furious widow, Olive, knew exactly who to blame. In a raw outburst of grief and rage, she stormed up to the Kray family home at 178 Valence Road, screaming accusations and hurling a brick through their window. A bold act that highlighted the personal toll of the violence, yet still couldn't crack the code of silence. This see no evil, hear no evil mentality wasn't just loyalty, it was survival in a world ruled by fear. As viewers, it's easy to wonder, would you have broken the silence? The investigation dragged on, but the Krays' grip on the community made every lead feel like a dead end, until the cracks finally started to show. By now, Ronnie Kray had taken a life, and he decided it was time for his twin brother Reggie to do the same. The chosen target was Jack the Hat McVitty, a small-time member of the Kray firm with a dangerous habit of running his mouth. Jack had been given a contract to kill Leslie Payne, the twins' former accountant, and had been paid up front, but instead of carrying it out, he pocketed the cash and bragged to anyone who would listen that he'd outsmarted the Krays. It was a fatal mistake. Jack was lured to what he thought was a party in the basement of 79 Evering Road, Stoke Newington. As he mingled, Reggie suddenly pressed a pistol to his head and pulled the trigger, twice. Both times, the gun jammed. Ronnie grabbed Jack, holding him in place, and Reggie switched tactics. Pulling out a large knife, he slashed Jack across the face and stabbed him in the stomach before driving the blade deep into his neck. One gang member would later recall the grisly scene, saying, "When Reggie was stabbing Jack, his liver popped out, and they had to flush it down the toilet." Jack McVitty's body was never found. More than 2 years passed before the murders that sealed the Kray twins' fate finally caught up with them. The first crack in their armor came from an unlikely source. their own former accountant, Leslie Payne. Realizing the game was up, Payne decided to talk. The code of silence that had protected the twins for so long was starting to crumble. By the night of May 8, 1968, Detective Superintendent Leonard Nipper Red was ready to move. Nearly 100 armed officers gathered at Tintagel House in Vauxhall for the final briefing. This was no ordinary police station. It had been chosen as Nipper's headquarters precisely because it was away from Scotland Yard and far from the Krays web of paid informers. At dawn, the operation began. In one swift strike, police arrested the twins and 24 members of their firm. The brothers were found holed up at Braithwaite House in Finsbury, their mother's council flat. Valence Road, their old stronghold, had already been demolished in the East End slum clearances. When the officers burst in, they found Ronnie curled up in bed with a young, fair-haired man, and Reggie asleep beside a girl from Walthamstow. The empire of fear they'd built was about to collapse. July 6, 1968. The Kray twins stood before Metropolitan Chief Magistrate Frank Milton at Old Street Court. Among the witnesses that day was someone the press simply called Mrs. X, the barmaid from the Blind Beggar. On the night George Cornell was shot, she couldn't identify the killer. But now, under police protection and out of the twins' reach, she finally spoke. She pointed directly at Ronnie Kray and his associate Ian Berry as the two men who had walked into the pub that night. With her testimony, the wall of fear protecting the twins began to collapse. The case was strong enough to be sent to the Old Bailey. After 8 long months on remand, the trial began in January 1969. It would become the longest and most expensive criminal case in British history at the time, stretching over several tense weeks. On March 8, 1969, after just 6 hours and 55 minutes of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty. Ronnie and Reggie Kray were convicted of the murders of George Cornell and Jack the Hat McVitty. Mr. Justice Melford made his sentence clear: 30 years in prison, no chance of parole. The reign of the Kray twins was over. Even after their convictions, the Kray twins' legend refused to die. Supporters, and there were plenty, insisted that during the twins' reign, only criminals and gangland rivals suffered. To ordinary people, they claimed, the East End was safer back then. Broadcaster and writer Dan Farson once told Cockney actor Arthur Mullard that the Krays only killed their own kind. Mullard's reply was blunt, delivered in his trademark drawl: "Yus, human beings. Then there are the myths." One of the most famous claims is that during the murder of George Cornell, a bullet ricocheted and struck a jukebox while "The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore" by the Walker Brothers was playing. In truth, the Blind Beggar had no jukebox at the time, only a record player. It said the song was playing as Ronnie Kray walked in, but whether the bullet made the record skip, repeating the line, "The sun ain't gonna shine anymore, anymore," as Cornell lay dying, no one really knows. Fact or fiction, the stories surrounding the Krays have blurred into something bigger than reality. Part truth, part legend, entirely unforgettable. And that's what we do here at Crime Pulse. Dive deep into the real stories behind the myths, separating the fact from the folklore. If you want more true crime told without the sugarcoating, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for the next case.